She gave him 12 years and built his entire life, then realized she'd been doing it completely alone. She asked him to shower before getting into bed with her. Not asked him to change careers, not asked him to move across the country, not asked him to do anything dramatic or life-altering. Just shower. After work. Before bed. And she had to ask. That single detail tells you almost everything you need to know about where this relationship is. She has been with this man for 12 years, engaged for 4 of them, and somewhere along the way the love stopped being a feeling and became more of a habit. A structure. A routine she keeps showing up to even though nobody told her she still had to. She wakes up next to him, makes coffee, goes to work, comes home, manages the house, manages him, goes to sleep, and does it again. Not because it fills her up. Not because she is choosing it with her whole chest every morning. But because it is what the day looks like now, and she has been doing it long enough that stopping feels more disorienting than continuing. Let me set the scene properly so you understand how we got here, because this story does not start at the end. It starts about 8 years ago, when she was young and ambitious and got a job opportunity that should have been celebrated. A real opportunity, the kind you work toward for years, the kind that quietly confirms you are exactly who you believed yourself to be. The kind that is supposed to feel like a beginning. And instead of popping a bottle and saying congratulations, her partner at the time got insecure. Got threatened. Made her feel like her success was somehow a problem for him, like her moving forward was the same as moving away from him. She found that unattractive, which is completely reasonable, and that is what cracked things open the first time. They separated. She moved on. And then she moved into something far worse, a relationship that started like a dream and turned into physical and emotional abuse. The kind of relationship that changes you at the cellular level, that makes you flinch at tones of voice and second-guess your own memories. When she finally got out of that, bruised and exhausted and probably questioning every instinct she had ever trusted, she looked around and thought, well, at least he never hit me. At least he never screamed at me the way that guy did. At least I know what I am getting with him. And she went back. Not because things were great. Not because she was wildly in love and could not imagine being apart. But because familiar felt safer than unknown, and safe felt like enough after everything she had just survived. It felt like a shelter. And sometimes a shelter is all you have the energy to want. That is such an important piece of this story, and I want to sit with it for a second. Because when you have been through genuine abuse, your threshold for what counts as acceptable can shift in ways you do not immediately notice. You stop asking whether something is good and start asking whether it is survivable. Whether it is tolerable. Whether it is better than the last thing. And that recalibration happens quietly, without ceremony, until one day you realize you have been grading your life on a curve so steep that almost anything looks like a passing score. That is not a solid foundation to build 12 more years on. But it is an incredibly human one. So she goes back. And she does not just go back as a partner, she goes back as a project manager. She helped him get a job through her personal professional connections, connections she had spent years cultivating, connections that carried her name and her reputation out into the world on their behalf. He got promoted twice, which must have felt validating for a while, like the investment was paying off, like she had made the right call. And then he got fired. She describes it as feeling like self-sabotage, and honestly, that word choice is really telling. She was not furious about it. She was not blindsided. She did not throw something across the room or demand answers. She just watched it happen the way you watch something you saw coming from a long distance away, inevitable and quiet and somehow still disappointing even when you expected it. She also set up his savings, his retirement accounts, his investments. She helped him get a car, navigating the paperwork and the financing because it needed to be done and she was the one who would do it. She handled the financial and logistical weight of buying their house, the home they both live in, the place she has to explain to guests is hers when the conversation comes up. She carries 2 jobs. She manages the household because if she does not ask him to do something, it does not get done. She tested this, literally tested it, pulling back deliberately and watching to see how long tasks would sit undone, how long the dishes would stack or the laundry would pile or the errand would wait, and the answer was indefinitely. Not eventually. Not slowly. Indefinitely. She eventually got so exhausted managing both the house and another full-grown adult that she hired a housekeeper. Not because she cannot handle housework, but because managing him was already a second full-time job on top of her actual second full-time job, and there are only so many hours in a day and so much a person can carry before their knees start to buckle. I need to take a breath here because the scope of what this woman has been carrying is genuinely staggering. On top of all of that, she has a disabled father living in the home. Her father. Her family. A man who raised her and who now depends on her, who lives under the same roof as the man she is engaged to. And her partner walks past him without saying hello or goodbye. Regularly. Not occasionally, not when he is running late, not when he is in the middle of something urgent. Regularly. She brought it up, tried to explain what it meant to her, how it felt to watch the man she loves be invisible to the man she lives with. His response was that he does not want to entertain anyone when he gets home, he just wants to relax. And I want you to really hear that. He does not want to say hello to her dad, who lives there, because it is too much effort after a shift at work. But she is supposed to be grateful that he is not abusive. That is the bar. That is what the comparison is. And then there is the money piece, which is quiet but sharp. When he was the higher earner, even briefly, he held it over her. That detail matters enormously. It tells you how he sees money in this relationship, not as something shared, not as something that belongs to both of them because they are building a life together, but as leverage. As power. As something to win with. Now that she makes significantly more, he complains about how she spends her own income. Her own income. She is hiding packages at the office to avoid arguments about purchases she made with her own money, that she earned, at her own jobs, that she worked. She is sneaking her own belongings into her own house like a teenager hiding something from a parent. Let that sink in for a moment and really sit there with it. She also mentions the conversations. And this is the part that I think quietly broke something in her, because it is not dramatic enough to point to, but it is constant, like a low-grade noise you cannot unhear once you notice it. She compares talking to him with talking to coworkers, colleagues she sees for 8 hours a day in a professional setting, and the difference feels, in her own words, massive. The depth is different. The curiosity is different. The vocabulary, the way ideas build on each other, the way a conversation can go somewhere interesting instead of circling back to the same flat surface. She feels guilty for noticing it. She calls herself harsh for admitting it internally, as though wanting to be mentally stimulated by your life partner is somehow an unfair expectation. But she cannot stop noticing. And the more she notices, the more she craves something different, something more, something that actually feels like connection and not just noise filling the same room from two people pointed at different walls. He drinks every day. He is a bartender, she acknowledges that context, understands it is occupational and cultural and probably hard to separate from the job itself. But she still finds herself pretending to be asleep when he gets home because conversations after he has been drinking do not go anywhere good. They turn into him correcting her over technicalities, picking apart the edges of what she said instead of hearing the center of it, the actual thing she was trying to communicate. So she closes her eyes. She slows her breathing. She lies completely still in the dark and waits for him to stop moving around so she can just stop existing inside the conversation. She is playing dead to avoid her own partner. In her own house. That she bought. That she manages. That she pays for. The counseling attempt went nowhere because he would get frustrated and leave. Not get uncomfortable and push through. Not get defensive but stay in the room and try. Leave. He would rather walk out the door than sit in the discomfort of working on something. And she absorbed that too, folded it into everything else she was already holding, added it to the pile, kept trying, kept communicating, kept having the big conversations that started with hope and ended in the same place they always ended, until she hit a wall so solid she stopped feeling angry about it and just started feeling numb. That numbness is the thing I want to talk about, because it is the quietest and most devastating part of this entire post. She is not furious. She is not in crisis. She does not have one clean reason to hold up like evidence. She just feels nothing where she used to feel something. Not peace. Not contentment. Not even comfortable indifference. Just absence. And that is honestly harder to explain to people than a blowout fight or a betrayal, because at least those things have edges. There is no villain here, no single moment that ruined everything, just a slow erosion of something that was never quite right to begin with, wearing away so gradually she almost did not notice until she reached in and found nothing left. Here is the truth, and I am going to say it plainly. She was never fully in love with this version of the relationship. She came back because something else was worse. She stayed because she had invested so much that leaving started to feel like throwing away everything she had already spent, and our brains are very bad at accepting that kind of loss. She buried herself in managing him because being useful felt safer than asking whether she was happy, because happy felt like a luxury and useful felt like something she could actually control. And now, 12 years later, she is sitting in a house she bought, with a man she has to remind to shower, pretending to be asleep when he comes home, hiding packages in the break room, and wondering how you end something kindly when there is no single catastrophic reason, when all you have is the accumulated weight of 12 years of small, quiet, undramatic reasons that somehow add up to everything. You end it because the slow reasons are enough. You end it because numb is not a life. You end it because 12 years of building someone else up while quietly disappearing yourself is more than enough evidence that this is not the partnership you deserve. You do not owe him a catastrophe before you are allowed to leave. You do not need to wait until something breaks loudly. Something has already broken, and it broke so quietly that even she second-guessed whether it counted. She asked if it is unrealistic to want a partner who supports her goals, takes care of themselves, contributes without being asked, and can hold a real conversation. No. That is not unrealistic. That is the baseline. That is the floor. She should not be looking up at the floor as if it is the ceiling. She deserves to find out what else is out there. She has earned that. She spent 12 years pouring herself into someone who walked past her disabled father without a word and complained about how she spent her own paycheck. She is 37, not 87. There is so much life ahead of her if she chooses to go take it. And the kindest thing she can do, for both of them, is stop pretending that numb is the same as content. It is not. It never was. Get the apartment. Let the dog have a good life with whoever keeps it. And walk out of that house the same way no one ever needed to remind her to. Just go. She welcomed her into the family for 13 years and her stepdaughter still pretends she doesn't exist. She has been trying to build a relationship with this girl since she was 6.5 years old. Think about that number for a second. 6.5. That is a child. That is pigtails and missing teeth and needing someone to help you figure out the world. And this woman showed up. She kept showing up. For 13 years she kept showing up, and for 13 years she was told, in one way or another, that she was not wanted. That takes something out of a person. And I think it is really important that we sit with how much grace and patience this woman has demonstrated before we talk about anything else, because the impulse when you hear a story like this is to immediately start analyzing the stepdaughter, picking apart the grief and the psychology and the childhood loss, and all of that matters. But so does the woman who has been quietly absorbing rejection for over a decade. 13 years of packed school lunches that went unacknowledged. 13 years of birthday cards that received no reply. 13 years of walking into rooms and watching a child go stiff and silent, not out of rudeness exactly, but out of something deeper and more entrenched, something that had calcified long before anyone had the language to name it. That kind of slow, sustained rejection does not announce itself all at once. It accumulates. It settles into your bones like cold. And yet this woman kept choosing to be present anyway, which tells you something important about who she is. Here is the background. She met her husband after his first wife passed away. His daughter was 5 when her mother died, 6.5 when they met, and the little girl was not immediately enthusiastic when they married, which is honestly understandable. Losing a parent at 5 years old is devastating in ways that ripple through your entire development. The world cracks open at that age in a way that most people cannot fully explain or even articulate. You are still learning what permanence means. You are still learning that the people you love are real and solid and yours, and then suddenly one of them is just gone. Not gone on a trip. Not gone in a way that has a return date. Gone in the way that rewires everything. And when a new person enters the picture and starts occupying space where your mother used to be, the emotional response is rarely clean or rational. It is raw and confused and often expressed sideways, through silence and resistance and a quiet, furious loyalty to the person who is no longer there to receive it. But here is where it gets complicated. They did family therapy. For 2 years. A real therapist, real sessions, real attempts to build something. And the therapist worked patiently with this girl to explore whether a relationship with her stepmother needed to look like a mother-daughter bond, or whether it could look like something else entirely, something friendly, something warm, something that had its own shape and its own name. The therapist was not asking her to replace her mother. That was never the goal. The goal was simply to find some version of coexistence that left room for everyone. And the stepdaughter refused to engage with that question. Not refused and came back later. Just refused. Week after week, session after session, the door stayed closed. The therapist could not get her to open up enough to even consider it as a possibility. And that is not a small thing. That is a child, given every tool and every invitation, choosing, consistently and deliberately, to remain unreachable. She also went to individual therapy where she talked about missing her mother and wanting more one-on-one time with her dad. And they gave her that. More time. Just her and her father. Weekends carved out, dinners reserved, space made deliberately and generously. And it did not change anything. She still refused to acknowledge the stepmother. She still refused to acknowledge the half-siblings, the children her father had with his new wife. As far as anyone can tell from the outside, she tells people she is an only child. She acts as though those children do not exist as her family. She has constructed an entire version of her life in which they are simply absent, erased from the story she tells about herself. That is not just distance. That is a complete refusal to incorporate any of this into her identity. Oh wow. I have to pause here because those kids are real children with real feelings and she is out here telling the world they do not exist as her siblings. That one actually stings. And then she turned 18. And you might think, okay, teenagers are difficult, maybe once she has more freedom and autonomy and space she will soften a little. Maybe the distance that comes with adulthood will make room for a new kind of relationship. But that is not what happened. She moved out. She sent her father a graduation ticket that was only for him. Not the family. Just him. One ticket. A choice so deliberate it could not have been accidental. She skips every holiday. She only invited her father to her birthday dinner. She hangs up the phone if someone else is about to be put on it. She ignores every message or attempt at contact from her stepmother. Every single one. Not a delayed response. Not a cold but polite reply. Silence. Consistent, unbroken silence that communicates, more clearly than any argument could, exactly where this young woman stands. At 19 years old, she is making deliberate and consistent choices to exclude everyone in this family except her biological father. And I want to be careful here, because I do not think she is a monster. I think she is a person in real pain who has made her father into the only safe attachment she has and is protecting that with everything she has. That is grief. That is trauma. That is what happens sometimes when a child loses a parent that young and does not have the tools to metabolize it. She has probably spent years operating from a place of survival, holding the one thing she did not lose with both hands, terrified that loosening her grip even slightly might mean losing that too. And in a painful, heartbreaking way, you can understand the logic. Even if you cannot accept the consequences it produces for everyone around her. But understanding why someone is doing something does not mean the people on the receiving end have to absorb the consequences indefinitely. The stepmother is not asking to cut this girl off. She is not asking her husband to stop seeing his daughter. She is saying, clearly and reasonably, that she and the children should stop being dragged into a dynamic that only produces rejection. If this young woman wants her father, she can have her father. But the rest of the family should not have to keep knocking on a door that is never going to open, especially the half-siblings who did not choose any of this and who are old enough to feel what it means to be treated like they do not exist. They are children who look around and see that their sister, their own family, has decided they are invisible. That lands somewhere. That leaves a mark. The husband's position is that she is too young to give up on. And emotionally, I understand that. She is his daughter. He loves her. The idea of accepting that his child may never want to be part of his family in the way he hopes is genuinely heartbreaking. It asks him to mourn something while it is still technically alive, and that is one of the hardest kinds of grief there is. But when pressed on how old she would need to be before acceptance becomes reasonable, he has no answer. And that silence is important. Because it suggests this is less about a principled stance on her development and more about his own inability to grieve what this relationship has not become. He is not protecting his daughter by insisting the whole family keep waiting. He is protecting himself from having to feel the full weight of this loss. Here is where I land on this, and I am going to be direct about it. The stepmother is right. Not because the stepdaughter is a bad person. Not because the situation is hopeless forever. But because you cannot force someone into a family. You cannot keep a door open that the other person is actively walking away from and call it hope. At some point, continued pursuit becomes its own kind of harm, because it communicates to the children in this family that their feelings and their worth are secondary to the project of winning over someone who has made her position very, very clear. The half-siblings deserve to grow up knowing they are enough. Knowing their family is real and whole and valid even if one person refuses to see it that way. The stepmother deserves to stop counting rejections and start building a life that is not organized around a void. And the husband needs to understand that loving his daughter and accepting her choices are not the same thing as abandoning her. He can have a relationship with her. He can show up for her. He can keep that door open from his side. But he cannot demand that his wife and children keep pressing their faces against a window for someone who has already drawn the curtains. The stepdaughter may grow. She may one day have the tools to process her grief in a way that allows her to see this family as something other than a replacement for what she lost. And if that day comes, the door should be open. But until then, the right move is exactly what this woman proposed. Let her have her father. Let the rest of the family have their peace. Stop making rejection a group activity and start protecting the people who actually want to be there. Drop a comment below telling me which story hit you harder, and if you made it this far, a like and subscribe honestly means a lot.